Hello, Comics Alternative fans. Before we start with the episode, we want to invite all of you to check out our Patreon campaign.
That's right. Go to www.patreon.com/comicsalternative for more details. There you'll find more information about the campaign and the cool rewards levels we have.
For as little as $1 a month, you can help us maintain good quality comics talk, and the more you contribute, the more perks you get.
These include monthly podcast episodes exclusive to Patreon supporters, as well as the chance to help us choose which books we review on the show. So be sure to visit www.patreon.com/comicsalternative and become one of our proud podcast patrons.
Yeah, and now on with the show.
This is the Comics Alternative, episode 131, reviews of Nemo, River of Ghosts, Rebels, number 1, and No Mercy, number 1. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Comics Alternative. I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy, and we're two guys with PhDs talking about comics.
And on this review episode, we're going to be looking at 3 recent titles. We're going to begin with the new one from Alan Moore and Kevin O'Neill, and that is the third in the Nemo trilogy, Nemo, River of Ghosts. Then we're going to look at 2 number 1 issues, Rebels from Brian Wood and Andre Mutti, and then Alex de Campi and Carla Speed McNeil's No Mercy. But before we get to those discussions, we want to let all of our listeners know that this episode of the Comics Alternative is brought to you by the wonderful folks at Discount Comic Book Service. Go to their website, dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. There you'll find all DC, Marvel, Image, and Dark Horse titles at 40% off of the cover price if you pre-order. All of the other publishers, you'll find that the discounts are 20 to 35% off the cover price. And every single month, you're going to find some incredible specials. And April is no different. Sometimes those specials will be 45% off cover price, sometimes 50% off cover price, and many times the discounts are more impressive than that.
That's right, and this month they have several bundles that you can take advantage of, or you can buy multiple comics from the same publisher for a deeper discount than you could get if you bought those issues individually. For example, if you want all 22 covers of the new Archie number 1 by Mark Waid and Fiona Staples, you can get all of them for 50% off.
Wow.
The new DC series that are starting up, there are multiple bundles there of DC Comics at 45, 55, and 65% off, and 50% off too. And there are the usual Valiant and Vertigo bundles for 50% off as well.
Yes, a lot of discounts every month, and again, April is no different. Go to the website of our sponsor, that's dcbservice.com, for all of your comics pre-ordering needs. And after you do get your comics there, please be sure to drop those guys a line and let them know that the 2 guys with PhDs sent you.
That's right.
Andy, we got a lot to discuss today, but before we get to our reviews, let's share some listener email that we've received over the past week.
Okay.
Mail time.
Ooh, the mail's here. That means we get to see our old friend, Mailbox.
Now, this is from Mike Moore. At least he signs his name Mike, although when I got the email the other day, it was from Michael Moore, and I thought, oh my God, this famous director is listening to our podcast.
Yeah, no chance of that.
But anyway, this Moore says to us, as you probably have heard numerous times by now, it's pronounced Ayn, not Anne Rand. just being picky. I enjoy the show. And I wrote Mike back and told him he wasn't being picky, but at least for me, I started off saying Ann, and then I was more or less committed from then on in. But I'd heard it pronounced Ian. But I'm not an Ayn Rand fan. I'm not an objectivist. So anyway, thank you, Mike, for correcting us, and more importantly, for listening to the podcast.
I think it's just my accent.
I think so. You've been down there in South Carolina a little too long.
No, I think the Ann would be more closer to my Midwestern accent.
Okay, I don't even know if that sounded Midwestern. That sounded a little painful.
It was. Well, I've lived in New Jersey, North Dakota, Indiana, and Milwaukee, and now the South. So I'm sure that I have picked up a wide variety of pronunciations.
Like Hank Snow, you've been everywhere.
There you go. Yes, like Hank Snow.
Yeah, and see, most people would say Johnny Cash, but the original guy who did it, who made it famous, Hank Snow.
That's true. You're right. You're right there. And I like how our listener sets that up by saying you've no doubt heard it.
Numerous times,
and he was the only one. So
yeah,
anyway,
yeah. No one said anything to me.
I always whenever I think of the name Ayn Rand, I always think of the Simon and Garfunkel song, a simple desultory Philippic.
I don't know it. No.
Okay, it's on The Sound of Silence, and it goes,
okay.
and it's almost like a precursor to The End of the World as We Know It by REM.
Oh, okay.
It goes? Was it? I've been Ayn Randed, nearly branded. I'm communist because I'm left-handed. That's the hand they use, or so they say. And anyway, they go through a whole bunch of. They go through a whole bunch of names of people that were popular at the time.
Wow.
But I'm pretty sure they say Ayn Rand. So that's what I hear in my head. Anyway.
Oh, well, that sounds a lot like I've Been Everywhere. That names all the cities.
That's true, I guess.
Wow. So we have some kind of harmonic convergence of topics here.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, thank you, Mike, for your email. Keep listening and keep the comments coming. And, continue to correct us if we make mistakes.
Yeah, sure.
Because
we got thick skins. We can take it.
And there'll be many opportunities for you to correct us.
Yeah, I'm sure. Today we'll be loaded up with them.
Well, let's go ahead and get into a discussion of the first title that we're going to be looking at, and this is Nemo, River of Ghosts, written by Alan Moore and illustrated by Kevin O'Neill. And this comes after the first two volumes, Nemo, the Roses, or actually the first one was Nemo, Heart of Ice. Right. And that was a couple years ago. Then last year we had Nemo, the Roses of Berlin, and now we have River of Ghosts.
Yes, that's true.
And I'm glad we're reviewing this because I think with both of the earlier books, you and I had discussed the possibility of reviewing them on the podcast, but then one thing led to another and we didn't. So the first one went by, we never got around to reviewing it. Then Roses of Berlin came out last year. We discussed the possibility of including it in a review. We didn't. This time around, at the end of the trilogy, here we go, River of Ghosts.
Yeah, I felt like we did talk about Roses of Berlin, but maybe it came up in our discussion because we did review Century, League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Century. And
right.
Maybe those other books came up in that discussion, possibly.
Yeah, and I think at one point you and I had even talked about reviewing the Roses of Berlin along with Century, but we already had enough on our plate for that show.
Yeah.
Because I believe that was the same show that we reviewed, the second Hip Hop Family Tree.
Sure.
So now that you've read not only this most recent one, Nemo River of Ghosts, what do you think of that within the context of the larger trilogy?
If the trilogy has a plot, I guess the plot is that about Janny Nemo's obsession with Aisha. Mm-hmm. She from H. Rider Haggard's books, and this kind of almost this obsession that spans almost the entire 20th century, basically going from 1910 or so into the 1970s, and so that's as that plot progresses, we get in River of Ghosts what really the cost of that obsession has been for Janny. Mm-hmm. She's lost men, including the man she loves. She's lost family. She's disconnected herself from the world, and now she's leading what many of her people think is a fool's errand to go after a woman that everybody knows is dead.
Mm-hmm. And they think she's crazy for doing that, but they also think she's crazy because she seems to talk to herself or no one who's there.
Right.
So, and that's where the ghosts in the aforementioned subtitle comes into play here. So, now if someone was not familiar with Heart of Ice and Roses of Berlin, do you think they'd be able to get anything out of River of Ghosts?
That's a good question. I would say they could get something out of it, but I think that there's a lot of. I think there is one long story that's going on here, and not three separate stories. So for example, they may get very well that Dr. Goldfoot's made these robot duplicates and so on, but the connection between that and the robot Maria from Metropolis and the Roses of Berlin and so on is maybe not going to be there so much, nor is the connection to the ghosts that Janny that accompany Janny along the way.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I asked that question is, you're right in pointing out that if you take all three books in the trilogy together, there is a longer storyline that spans quite a number of years, decades, and that is, Janny, her relationships, but more specifically, her engagements with Aisha, and because we see that in all three of the books. But and we discussed this last year when we were reviewing the Century collection. The thing about the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, or this world, and this is a part of it. This is almost like a tributary that goes off to the side, really, not figuring into the main League storylines, but just something off to the side here. With all of the League books and each one of these Nemo texts, you really need to do a little digging to understand the references that Moore is making. There's the obvious links with Nemo, and who Nemo refers to, but then there are other not so obvious and not so apparent references that he's making in in, let's say, pulp fiction in the early part of the 20th century, other adventure tales,
Right.
film, things of that sort. So, whether you come to the Nemo books in the first, second, or third, I think that, the reader needs to be aware that in order to get as much as you can with any one, it would be good to, if not knowing the backstory, be willing to, do a little research and dig around to find a little bit of context. And I think that'll help appreciate the narrative. So I do think that someone could get something out of River of Ghosts just as they could from the very first one, Heart of Ice. But the larger storyline, you're right. If a reader comes to River of Ghosts without any experience with the earlier books, they really won't see what the obsession is or what the big deal is behind Jani going after Aisha.
Yeah, that's right. But then again, so much of this book, in a lot of ways, like parallel to the other books, is Jani on a journey. In both Heart of Ice and Roses of Berlin, Jani moves through the world, through Moore's pastiche of popular entertainment, and so they have almost a picaresque quality to them, so that there's a series of set pieces that are based around literary or movie references or whatever that Moore wants to make.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the ruins of the underwater city of Mu. That's one little part. There's the the encounters with the dinosaurs on the island that they arrive at. There are the creatures from the Black Lagoon that they come across, and all those things are just kind of really brief moments in the story that are little references to other things before Jani and her crew make it to the secret headquarters that is being run by Dr. Goldfoot.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, have you ever seen the Dr. Goldfoot movies?
No, I have not.
So it's what is it? Dr. Goldfoot in the Bikini Machine. And,
so that's why all of the bikini, what do you call the bikini bots?
Yeah.
In River of Ghosts are dressed the way that they are.
I'm trying to remember what the second one is. But Dr. Goldfoot is played by Vincent Price. Dr. Goldfoot and the Girl Bombs is the second one. And Dr. Goldfoot in the Bikini Machine has Vincent Price as the villain, but also Frankie Avalon and Dwayne Hickman, a.k.a. Dobie Gillis.
Dobie Gillis, Dwayne Hickman?
Are the heroes
Wow.
of the agents who are going after Dr. Goldfoot. And then Dr. Goldfoot and the Girl Bombs has Fabian instead of Frankie Avalon.
Wow.
And I guess if there had been a third one, it would have had Bobby Rydell in it or something.
Wow, yeah.
If you go down the list of Italians, teenage heartthrobs. So those, I guess in Alan Moore's League of Extraordinary Gentlemen world, the evil scientists are hard at work building humanoid robots.
Right.
And
not just any humanoid robots.
Yeah.
Bikini-trons.
Bikini-trons, which are also happen to be Stepford wives as well, as we get one little reference in the background to in one of the images.
Yeah. And it's interesting that we're bringing this up now, because an observation we made, and it wasn't a major one, but it was one in passing, but ultimately it became the subtitle for that episode where we reviewed Century. We were commenting about how Kevin O'Neill seems to draw prominent nipples. and we had called Century a nipple-rich text. And so I was going back through in preparing for today's show, I was going back through the earlier Nemo books just to see what the nipple situation was in terms of O'Neill's art. And it's not as prominent in the first two books, but then when we get to River of Ghost, and somewhere in the first third of the book, I think, someone makes mention to Goldfoot and how he has a preference for blonde, buxom women. And I thought, okay, this is going to be the volume where we get O'Neill to do a little bit of what he did in Century. And I mean, you could tell from the cover where you have these sexy Nazi-like women with guns. And that thing just has fetish written all over it.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And
then there's a free-for-all fight with all the Bikini-trons.
Yeah, that's right. And so, in the past works we've seen from Alan Moore and League, he does seem to tie in the story into certain pop culture trends in those particular eras. And the mid 1970s were kind of the heyday of the sexploitation movies and low budget drive-in pictures, and definitely the Dr. Goldfoot movies, well, were late 60s, but were made in that era of not just spy movies, but lots of parodies of spy movies as well. And while I have seen the Dr. Goldfoot movies, I would not necessarily say they're very good movies, nor are they even on a par with, say, Dean Martin's Matt Helm movies, which are just kind of fun to watch. Even if you realize what a kind of throwaway thing they were. But the Dr. Goldfoot movies were made by American International Pictures, which was the company that Roger Corman made many of his movies for. And so you can kind of get a sense of what the budget and quality of those was going to be.
Well, this raises a question you were making. We've been discussing some of these literary and also pop cultural references. One of the questions that came up, or one of the discussion topics that came up last year when we were reviewing Century, is at what point does Alan Moore's intertextuality become a hindrance to not only the enjoyment of the narrative, but also the ability to decipher and appreciate the story for what it is. And I remember us discussing at times there seemed to be a little too much of a reliance on that intertextuality. It's almost as if he's trying to impress us too much, or if not trying to impress us, then at least he's getting lost in the game of intertextuality. Did you feel any of that of the Nemo stories? That's
interesting, because as I looked at it again after reading through it the first time, and as we've talked about before too, the reading experience, for at least for me, of these League of Extraordinary Gentlemen books often is kind of twofold: one reading for the narrative and the other reading for the references. And so I think that one of the advantages of this book in avoiding the kind of excessive referentiality of like Century, for example, is that is where this book takes place. which is it's not in an urban environment, so O'Neill's not drawing all these background characters. It is, mainly on, on the Nautilus and then onto this island, and so the references are actually fairly thin, and most of the references seem to be tied into the narrative in some way. Mm-hmm. So if you don't know, the Hugo Hercules character that Janny employs to help her with her invasion of this island, Dr. Goldfoot, then Aisha, the creatures from the Black Lagoon, all these references have a purpose in the story, rather than we very rarely come across a character making a kind of side reference, or or just somebody saying something that refers to something that isn't going to factor into the rest of the book. Those things happen, but they are not nearly as thick as they are in the other books.
Right. Yeah, and with some of Moore's stuff and League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, case in point, it's almost like reading Gravity's Rainbow. It's like, okay, if you sit down to read it for the first time, do you read it with the Gravity's Rainbow companion beside you that helps you to understand what the hell's going on the first time you go through it? Right. Or do you try to read it cold, just from beginning to end, just try to get the story as best as you can? And, and then along with that, how much value in terms of the quality, let's say, of a work of art, in this case, a graphic novel or comic in Nemo, how much value do you place in the fact that there is so much intertextual references, or with Century, let's say, or the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen storyline, much heavier, many more intertextual references. Does the more intertextuality make it a quote-unquote more serious or weightier text than something like Nemo? Because I'm with you. There's not near the amount of those kind of literary references and pop cultural references in Nemo. So in a sense, it seems like an easier read. I don't want to say it's a lighter read or a less substantial or significant read, but it's a little easier.
Yeah, and I think that taken together, now I haven't read all three of these books together, but I did find the experience of reading Heart of Ice and Roses of Berlin to be much more entertaining and pleasurable than reading Century, and I also, it also feels like these stories, the Nemo stories, are driven by a character in Johnny Nemo that Moore has given enough depth for the reader to care about, whereas what I said about Century was I felt like it was too thesis driven, and less of an interesting narrative. And so in following the character of Johnny Nemo and what how she's both literally and figuratively haunted by the ghosts of her father and her past, in this obsessive quest to destroy Aisha, is I think a really effective narrative, and based on, I think, a large part on the locations that Moore has chosen to place these stories. Heart of Ice being in Antarctica, and this one being in this jungle environment is makes them less cumbersome than the other League books can be.
Yeah. Now, I vaguely remember us last year talking and perhaps speculating about where Moore would go next with his League universe, but I can't remember what we discussed. But I would hope that there are going to be other ancillary narratives like the Nemo trilogy that spin off of the main League of Extraordinary Gentlemen storyline.
Yeah, I'm really curious where Alan Moore's career is going in general anyway, because, we have the Avatar Providence book series that he's doing. Mm-hmm. And that's really the main thing I know. If he's going to continue doing comics in general or doing League stories, I'd be curious to see what he chooses to do. But if he does continue in this vein, I do hope that they'll tend to be more like the Nemo books and be well done adventure stories with with the occasional references to please the fans who look to the League books for those things.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that stories like this, while like the Nemo books, while not essential to the League, right, they really do flesh out the world much more.
Yes.
So, because not only does it continue with certain characters that we see originally in the League stories, it introduces new ones that have sometimes indirect links back to earlier events or characters or locations. And so again, it just gives it more beefiness.
Yeah, and one of the things that surprised me when reading this book is that, for example, that Hugo Hercules had not shown up before in a League book. It would seem like that character would be perfect. Now, I don't know if he's referenced somewhere else, in brief, but the fact that this precursor to Superman who appeared in comic strips at the beginning of the 20th century.
That's right.
Should be the type of character that Moore jumps on.
Right, because he was like Wiley's Gladiator, right? So you would think that he would have been referenced earlier, but
yep. And that's one of the few side kind of illusion, deep illusions, I guess, that's made here, that Hugo Hercules was hired by Doc Savage's father, Clark Savage Sr., to murder Hugo Danner, the character from Gladiator. So there you go. So there's some cross-referencing there.
Yeah. Well, if he does go with another storyline, maybe another trilogy from League, I wonder what direction Moore will take.
Yeah, that'll be interesting to see.
Whatever it is, I'm sure that Lovecraft will play a big part of it in some way, as he did in the Heart of Ice.
Yeah.
Any other words on Nemo, River of Ghosts before we move on to the next title?
No, I think I'm ready.
Okay. Let's go to Brian Wood and Andre Mutti's Rebels. This is coming out from Dark Horse, issue number 1. Let me start off by asking you, instead of what you thought of this, because that's really broad, how does it stack up to your expectations that you had before you read Rebels number 1?
I'm not sure what I had as far as expectations were concerned. With Brian Wood's work, I guess maybe there might be something like some other of his historical narratives rather than his historical fiction, rather than his, say, more dystopian or futuristic stuff. So maybe Northlanders would be the one thing that might set this up somewhat. I think it, with Northlander's doing a contemporary spin on a Viking story. And in here, he's doing a contemporary spin on American Revolutionary War story. I'm getting the sense from some of the stuff at the beginning of the book that that down the line, Rebels is going to become also a kind of commentary on contemporary America. Mm-hmm. But I didn't see that much in the book yet. I don't know if you caught anything like that.
I didn't, and I have to tell you, that was one of my, I don't want to say one of my expectations, but that was something that I was sensitive to going into this, because to me, and I know we mentioned this a couple of months ago when it was solicited, and we mentioned this on a preview show, the way that things are worded is that, this is not... in fact, on the very first page, it just sets things up. In a rush of great public resistance to an oppressive and excessive government, a hometown militia movement is formed in rural America. This is not 2015, but 1775. And that's the way that things were worded, and maybe exactly the same way in the preview solicit. And I was hoping that this wouldn't be either a thinly or not so thinly veiled commentary on contemporary politics. Not that I have anything against that. It's just that, well, that was what DMZ was. So are we going to get a DMZ set in the 18th century is what I was wondering. So that was, I guess, a question I had coming into it more than any expectation. And outside of that earlier intro part of which I just read, which is on the first page, I'm like you, I don't really see much in this first issue that leads me to feel that this is what that might become, some kind of allegory of contemporary times.
Right. The only thing I see is the how the main conflict between the colonialists and the British hinges on issues of property tax. Mm-hmm. And so, the right wing's resistance to taxes in our current era is evident there, I guess.
Right.
But I'm not seeing too much of a direct one-to-one connection between this series and the current era.
Yeah, and we should mention that this first issue, for those who may not have read it, is the way that I look at it now is as setup. We don't get really much into the Rebels part. I guess we do to a point, but basically this sets up the initial relationship between who I guess will be the protagonist, Seth, and Mercy Abbott. And so in this first issue, we have Seth meets Mercy, and later on they become married. I guess they'll be married in issue number 2. But there's also the relationship between Seth and his friend Ezekiel, who when we first see these guys as teenagers, as young teenagers, in, what was it, 1760 some? Yes, 1768. Ezekiel is a runner for the Redcoats, so he's working with the British, but he has no he basically has no dog in the fight, right? So he's fired upon, or at least the British are fired upon, and Ezekiel basically breaks away from him, and eventually comes to meet Seth and his family and the people who we would consider the rebels here, the colonialists.
Right.
And then he becomes a rebel, so to speak, after this initial setup. And so this initial setup is not only when Seth meets Mercy and becomes friends with Ezekiel, but it's also the what you mentioned, this protest about taxation, the acquisition of land, or the threat of that by the British government. And here we have, and I had to go back and do a little history background check on my part, because I wasn't really sure at first what the New Hampshire grants refer to. And if this is something that I had in earlier, like let's say high school or even college history courses, I had forgotten. So, I did a little digging and found out what all that referred to. So, because I was wondering, why is this starting in the 1760s and not in the 1770s or later? But there's your answer. That the New Hampshire grants really does set up a lot of this stuff and tells us a little bit about not only Seth but also his family. And that goes a long way of explaining why Seth, I guess, will become the way he becomes. So, I like this first issue. And one of the things, though, that I want to come back to when we get to our next title, and that is No Mercy, I feel that this is a good first issue, but it's one that even by the end of it, I don't know if I have a solid enough grasp on it to make any kind of judgments. I feel that I need at least issue 2 and perhaps issue 3 to get a better feel of what Rebels is going to be about. And I felt and we can talk about this later, but I felt the same way with No Mercy. I liked issue number 1 of Rebels, but I feel that it was primarily set up, and it nicely whets my appetite for what's to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. By the way, have you watched the AMC TV series Turn at all?
It's funny that you have asked that, because over the past 2 weeks, every now and again, when Mandy and I are watching something on AMC and they have a commercial for Turn because the new season starts soon,
right?
I've said to her several times, I gotta watch this. I gotta watch that first season and see what this is about. So, in answer to your question, no.
Yeah, I haven't watched all of it. I started watching the first few episodes of the first season, and then kind of, like so many TV shows right now, let it slide. But I did enjoy it quite a bit, and I enjoy that idea. I enjoy that kind of historical fiction that we're starting to see on television too, of with the fictionalization of real historical events, especially with Turn with the American Revolution, and so how real characters like, or real historical figures like George Washington and so on, and Benedict Arnold function in that series. And so it feels like Rebels is inevitably going to get compared to that. Brian Wood does bring in Ethan Allen towards the end of this issue, so we do know too that these characters are going to be interacting with real historical figures.
Right.
So I'll be curious to see how those things ultimately compare. But when we get into talking about No Mercy, we definitely can talk about this, because I did have a slightly different response to Rebels than I did to No Mercy. I thought that Rebels is a good first chapter, but I feel like reading the trade of the first 6 issues that are going to comprise the first narrative arc of Rebels is probably going to be the way I'm going to go with this series, because it didn't feel like the ending ended in any kind of way that made me feel like, oh, I need to absolutely read the next chapter next. I mean, I want to read the next chapter, but there was nothing kind of compelling me, whereas I thought that No Mercy did have a definite pull for me as to, what happens next. I want to know what happens next, possibly before the trade comes out. Oh,
exactly, and we'll talk about this in a moment, but it's definitely a cliffhanger. I do not think that the ending of Rebels could be described in any way as a cliffhanger.
Yeah. So Rebels, I'm trying to find the, so A Well-Regulated Militia is the title of this first narrative arc. That's going to run for the first 6 issues. And so I'll be looking for the trade for that.
Yeah. Well, and here's something to think about, and I know I've mentioned this before on the show when we were last year when we were discussing Bitch Planet. I felt something a little similar to what you feel now with Rebels when we were discussing Bitch Planet. And I remember making a comment at the time is, there are a lot of other Image books that are coming out with #1 issues that are longer than normal, and it would have been nice to have gotten a little more story so I could get a better feel for the world that Kelly Sue DeConnick was creating. And, that's really unfair because with Image, it's a much different business model, and for a variety of reasons, creators may not want to or even be able to produce a longer than average book. Not everyone is Robert Kirkman, who can come out with a significantly long first issue of Outcast. Although I do think that we have gotten a number of #1 issues from Image that do give us a good chunk of story that first time out. And it's almost like we've gotten a little spoiled with that, or at least I feel that I have. So sometimes when I read something like Rebels or earlier Bitch Planet, I feel it would have been better if it had been a longer issue, which I wouldn't be thinking if it weren't for those other Image #1 issues that were significantly longer. But I do think that Rebels, it's a nice first taste. It would have been better to get a little more story. And also, I think you're right in pointing out the difference between this and No Mercy, the way that they end. I mean, there's really no urgency at the end of issue #1 of Rebels, except for, this is the most urgent it gets. This is the voiceover of Seth, and he's narrating about his relationship with Mercy, and it ends, "My war was begun." He's talking about being in the militia and all that. So, we know that anticipates what's coming up in the next issue or two, but it's definitely not the kind of cliffhanger we get with No Mercy.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't necessarily feel like I like more story in the first issue would have helped me that much more so than, say, an ending that was more of a cliffhanger. But at the same time, that's not what Brian Wood is doing here, so I don't want to say he should have had a cliffhanger and be basically saying Brian Wood should have written a different book than what he wrote.
Right.
The ending of this book is the kind of compelling part of the ending of this book is the two characters coming together and the hint, not the hint, the statement about what their future is going to be. That's gonna be the thing that's gonna keep readers coming back, and for me, it's enough of a hook to get me to want to read 6 issues in one sitting.
So now, is that how you read The Massive?
Yeah, I guess. I never finished reading The Massive, but the first 2 story arcs, I guess, I read in trade.
And because I'm the same way in after the first 2 or 3 issues, then reading them in trade. But I don't know if I did it because of the way that the story was constructed as much as I did as a function of my own time, in the way that I read, my habits of reading. I let things fall behind. There are certain titles that I try to keep up with on a fairly regular basis. Saga is one of those. Copperhead has been one. Cowl to a point. But then and of course, all Image titles that I'm mentioning. But then there are others that, as much as I may like the first issue, I get a little lazy and don't pick up the title again until the first trade. So,
yeah, I've just on a personal note made a kind of dramatic shift in my reading habits where I've completely now stopped reading monthly comics. Except possibly on Comixology. If there's something that's an individual book that I feel the need that I feel compelled to read immediately, I will download it on Comixology, basically because I don't have a local comic shop anymore to deal with. But I found that in reading monthly comics, they were just kind of piling up around me, and I was never going to get caught up. And so I figured I'm just going to stop, and then when if there's something I really want to read later on, I will get it in trade or track down the back issues.
Yeah. Now, before we move on from Rebels, I want to ask you something. And we don't have page numbers in the comic, but I guess this is about 17, 18, 19 pages in. This is in the last half, and this is when the Colonials are outside and also inside of the courthouse. Mm-hmm. And you have the British Redcoats. There's a team of them outside keeping the ones out from going in, and then there's a team inside that has just fired shots into those who were in essence staging a sit-in of the courthouse. And the page that I'm looking at, this is when there are a couple pages where Seth becomes a leader, and he says, this is at the bottom of that page, listen to me, stop, you citizens have a legitimate grievance and are entitled to assemble freely as free men. Do you see where I'm talking about?
No, which of the pages is this on?
I think this is on about page 18, because I know we're looking at digital copies.
Yeah, so is it on page 18 of the digitals? Wait, okay. Yes, I see it. Yes.
Okay. Now, if you look at the earlier part of that page, there's basically it's in three tiers. The top is just one long panel, and then the second is 2-panel tier, and then another 2-panel tier. Above, like the first and second, we see action. There are the Colonials outside, and it looks like they're rushing the Redcoats. Right. And then we get someone, looks like they're kicking a Redcoat, and Seth, I'm assuming, says stop. And then someone stomping the Colonials on a Redcoat, and Seth is saying stop this at once. And then we get this little speech. But then you turn the page, and we see in that second tier the British soldiers who were there, and they have their guns ready, but they're not firing. And it just seemed to me there are two different actions going on here, because I think if one of their own is being stomped by a Colonial, wouldn't they start firing?
Yeah.
It was a little confusing to me.
I see exactly what you mean, especially because also there's the actions going on outside, and also on top of that, the actions going on inside. And are these the same Redcoat soldiers firing on the men inside as are the ones that are standing outside?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think the actions are confusing, and I had a similar reaction to that idea that could the colonialists really get away with stomping on a Redcoat when we've already seen the Redcoats behaving incredibly violently towards the protesters inside the building? Wouldn't that have just gotten everybody shot? And how is it that Seth is able to stop this? Stop his men from getting cut down.
Yeah, because at first, going back to that previous page where Seth is yelling stop, and you see someone kicking and then stomping on a Redcoat, at first I thought, okay, well, what they're doing here is that second tier is basically a cutaway to the interior of the courthouse, because that's where all the violence is happening, and that's where the British just shot up the guys. But no, it's going on outside, because this is obviously Seth yelling stop this at once, because then we have his little speech. So it just seemed a little unrealistic there. Other than that glitch, it may be a relatively minor glitch, but a glitch nonetheless. I mean, I think that this was a really enjoyable and cohesive first issue. But I wanted to get your take on the action on those 2 pages.
Yeah, no, I agree. I had a similar reaction, and I wonder if, I wonder what the kind of goal of those events were for Wood and Mutti.
Yeah, and this is where the editor. I mean, I'm not letting off the creators, the writer, and the artist, but this is where a good editor would come into play.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay, who is the editor on this? Sierra Hahn.
Uh-huh.
And then Spencer Cushing as the assistant editor. So, okay, guys, did you notice this? Anything else on Rebels?
Nope.
Okay. Let's look at the third title. Alex de Campi and Carla Speed McNeil's No Mercy. Now, this is an Image title. This is one of the many, many, many number ones that Image seems to be coming out with every month.
Mm-hmm. And this is one I'm glad we're covering, because I think this might be one that could fall under other people's radars in the glut of new Image titles that have come out.
That's a good point, because I was thinking the exact same thing. This doesn't have... I mean, Alex de Campi is a big name, but her name doesn't have the kind of immediate draw, as some of the other creators who have been coming out with new series, like, Jeff Lemire, Grant Morrison.
Mm-hmm. And Alex de Campi has been incredibly prolific lately as well. With the Grindhouse books, now this week...
Archie versus Predator.
Yeah. And other and a couple other Image titles. So her work is out there quite a bit. So.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so you were maybe a good place to begin is at a point that we've already covered a little bit, and that is by discussing the way that this ends. Now, we don't want to give away any spoilers, but as you mentioned, this is definitely a cliffhanger at the end, and I have to tell you, that caught me a little by surprise. I wasn't expecting this to... Well, I guess on the one hand, I wasn't expecting it to end this way on that very last page, but what happens to lead up to that last page that leads this group of students where they end up, I didn't expect that.
Yeah, I think there's two things in this first issue that do make me more interested in coming back for the second issue than, say, in waiting for the trade. And that is not just the cliffhanger of an ending, but the way de Campi and Carla Speed McNeil foreshadow the horrible events that are going to happen to these characters. A lot of this book deals with social media, and the plot basically follows a group of young Princeton students who are going to South America in order to do some the kind of service activities that young people do in order to get into Princeton. and so as they're gathering for the bus to go to the place where they're going, and they're all using social media to some degree to communicate about what's going on, and then the book cuts to a flash forward, basically, of the group with on a Facebook type page and the comments underneath the photo say things like, "Oh my God, how sad, they were all so young." What else? Prayers to their families, and so on. So that's clearly something horrible has happened to these people, and we get that within the first couple pages. We find out that is the outcome of this, and so I think Campi does a really good job with that, not only of the way she integrates social media, which seems to be in a large part what this book is about. The back matter also talks quite a bit about using social media. In fact, there's a contest to summarize the issue using emojis.
Okay.
and so you've got all that, but that the ending of, or you know, that whatever the fate of these characters is foreshadowed at the beginning, and then the ending of the book is a cliffhanger that sets up a mystery for what's to come and what's going to happen to these characters.
As you were describing this, I went back. I was listening, obviously, but I went back to look at the February previews because that's where this was solicited. Because I wanted to make sure that I thought what I was thinking was actually the case, and it is that it was the first 3 pages of story that we get in this first issue. Those are the sample pages that are in the solicit from the February previews. So you have that first page where you got these young college students, and they're each of them are on some kind of, it looks like most of them are on some kind of portable device. There's social media. They're talking about this, and then you get that 2-page spread that you had just referenced. The timeline photos, something like on Facebook where people were saying how sad they were so young and all of that, and then you even get a little reference to the creators there in a sidebar. So I remember when I saw this in the original solicit, there was a part of me that wasn't, let's say, just as enthusiastic as you were, because I remember you pointed out that this looked exciting, that you may want to discuss this on a future podcast, and I thought, well, okay, I guess. But it didn't capture me. And part of the reason was because of the emphasis on the social media. It just seemed a little, I don't know, not too trendy, but you see a lot of creators, and this is not just the case in comics, but it's also on television programs as well, and I guess even in films, where you get directors or writers or creators of some sort who are trying to replicate the portable device experience. How do you represent texting? How do you represent posting in comics or on a television program? And I'm thinking of House of Cards. I think that they do that fairly well. Although I am glad that in the most recent season they cut back on that significantly more than they did on the first 2. So, because I think it worked, but if it's used too much, it becomes almost like a crutch. And so I was wondering if I would have a similar experience with No Mercy. But you're right. Whatever happens to them that is foreshadowed in that 2-page spread just changes things. And I think that now that I've read the entire first issue and I know where at least I think Campi's going, I'm okay with this whole social media youth emphasis at the very beginning. That when I first started to read this first issue, and definitely when I saw the solicit, I thought, oh my God, okay, is this going to be something that's for me or not?
Yeah, because it's on one hand too, what happens to these kids isn't necessarily all that much different from other similar narratives. There's lots of stories that, if you were to summarize the basic plot of what happens in this book, that are like that. It is and I'm trying very hard not to give anything away. It is these characters' immersions in social media at the beginning of the book, and what seems to be leading towards a story of survival. Not just are these kids equipped to survive, but are contemporary young people equipped to survive under extraordinary circumstances and equipped to survive without social media. Like, what do you do? How does a generation who is so used to being wired up like these kids are, and connected like these kids are, how do they function once that's it's dramatically taken away from them?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's the danger though of that premise becoming something almost like a cliche, because I can name right off the top of my head at least 2 commercials right now that are based on that premise, where a parent takes his or her kids out of the social media environment and they seem lost. Right. They keep moving their hands for some unknown reason and looking down at them as if they're pressing buttons. So, I don't think that that's what's going to happen here, but I will say, or I mention again, that where this ends up, and again, without giving anything away, no spoilers here, I'm really pleased with where it's going. Although I do have to say, where my turn came is, this is about halfway through, and this is where the kids see the bus that's going to be taking them to the destination, El Cometa Haley. The reference to Chitty Chitty Bang Bang won me over. Someone texts, WTF, Chitty Chitty Bang Bus.
Yeah. That's interesting because it's the reference to Bang Bus that won me over.
Yeah. Okay, it's the Bang Bus, that's one thing. But if you think about it, though, how many of these guys at this age, young college students, know about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang?
That's a good point.
So you can tell probably that the creators are a little older than this, but hey, they may know about Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and then they're extra clever by combining it with Bang Bus.
Yeah. But
it was the Bang Bus reference that I think left us speechless right there.
Yeah. One of the things I did want to mention in this is Carla Speed McNeil's art, because she's an artist, a writer and artist on Finder, for example, whose work I've really enjoyed over the years. And so, while I like Finder a lot, I also like seeing Carla Speed McNeil doing art with other writers and something like this.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, the art's incredible.
Yeah.
I really like this. My one issue, and you're going to think that this is a nitpick. It's kind of like my nitpick when we reviewed the first issue of Lady Killer. You remember I made that reference about the consistency with the pearl necklace. When the character Gina, the one who's from, I believe she's from Michigan, Traverse City, right? When we first see her on that very first page, she is wearing a tank top with a cherry on it, with cherries on it, and it's white. But then when she gets on the Chitty Chitty Bang Bucks, and we see her talking with, and I can't remember who this dude is, but she's talking with some guy. This is the guy who travels around a lot. Her tank top is gray. Now, this may be, colorist, I'm sure, but I just thought that was a little interesting, because at first I thought, okay, she's, it's, out of the sun, it's in the shadows of the bus's interior, so that's why her T-shirt appears gray. However, there is at least one panel where we see some sunlight coming in, and it's on her, actually, her chest or breast area, and you can see that it's a darker gray in shadow, but the tank top is gray even in the sunlight. Mm-hmm. So outside of that little thing, I think that the art overall is just incredible.
Okay. Well, I didn't notice that. So
okay, well, call me the consistency police.
Good for you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's about all. I think. In comparing No Mercy to Rebels, I'm more compelled to try to follow No Mercy from month to month to see, or at least into the second month to see what happens next, because of not only of the cliffhanger but of the foreshadowing that's that's done so well at the beginning. Now, whether that is going to continue into a third issue, or if at that point I'll wait for the trade, I'm not quite sure. But I will be curious to see what DeCampi does with that. Plus, in the end of this issue, there's some back matter where Alex DeCampi provides some basically what I guess journal entries that she wrote while living outside of the U.S. between 1992 and 2007, what she calls her rebel years. And so she's going to be providing some of those.
An apropos naming for this episode.
Yeah, those text pieces. And I'm assuming that like so many other books, those things are only going to be in the individual issues and not in the trade. But maybe I'm wrong. But at the very least, there is that in the first issue.
Mm-hmm. And, on the topic of the back matter, one of the things I really appreciated is at the first part of this back matter where DeCampi is introducing things. This is a piece, The House with No Name. Mm-hmm. She is, I think, describing or explaining why she may be doing what we think she's going to be doing here. And I really appreciate this. She says, this is in that third paragraph, teenagers, of course, are inherently dramatic. I adore writing them because they default to being such horrible people to each other. I love how the better shoujo mangas can make two teenage girls interacting outside a school classroom the most dramatic and heart-stopping moment on earth. And I lament that in the U.S., and indeed often enough in Japan, it's perceived we need to add extra stuff to the teenage experience, like talking cats, neo-dystopian futures, vampires, to make it more interesting. Do these people remember their teenage years? And that's a great point, because I think I hadn't thought of this, or every now and again it occurs to me, but I think that reading DeCampi here, pointing out what really is obvious. I mean, we really don't need a lot of these twists like vampires or talking animals or, whatever, premise device that we plant on top of not just teenage interaction, but, any kind of human interaction to create great drama. And so I'm glad that apparently in No Mercy, DeCampi's going to stay away from that.
Yeah.
Yep.
I agree. And that is always one of the challenges about writing about teenagers, and what makes when that kind of story about youth works, it works for the reasons that DeCampi is describing there.
Mm-hmm. And adult interaction, too. I mean, think of almost every Woody Allen movie ever created.
Sure.
Yeah. And again, I brought up Woody Allen, so there you go.
There you go.
That's my one reference for this episode.
Okay. We're done.
Okay.
You had to squeeze that in at the last second.
That's right. So we started off with Nemo, River of Ghost, went to Rebel, #1, and then ended with No Mercy, #1. So this was a good solid week of reading. And if you want to read the kind of things that Andy and I discuss on our shows, well, you can pre-order them by visiting the website of our sponsor, DCBService.com. If you go to Discount Comic Book Service or their sister company, In Stock Trades, you'll find incredible deals. With In Stock Trades, they have a variety of graphic novels, trade, archival collections that have already been published. With Discount Comic Book Service, you pre-order. So whether you pre-order or get something that's already been published, you can't go wrong with those guys. As we say on every episode, drop them a line and tell them that the two guys with PhDs sent you. And then after you do get your comics through those guys, get in touch with us and let us know the kind of things that you're going to be reading. If you go to our website and click on the Send Voicemail tab on the right-hand side of your browser, then you can quickly and easily leave a message recorded through SpeakPipe. Or if you want to dial a phone, our number is 4153-COMICS. That's 415-326-6427.
That's right. Or you can get a hold of us by email. We are 2guys@comicsalternative.com. Or you can get a hold of us individually. I'm Andy at comicsalternative.com.
And I'm Derek at comicsalternative.com.
Or you can check us out on Twitter, where we offer updates to the podcast as well as new content on our blog. You can check out our Twitter feed at the number 2 Guys with PhDs.
That's right. You can also find us on Facebook, on Tumblr, and on Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast through iTunes. You can stream us through Stitcher. You can also find us on TuneIn. And as always, you can find every single one of our episodes as well as our growing list of reviews and comics-related commentary on our website, which is comicsalternative.com.
That's right. All the ways to get a hold of us. Let us know how we're doing.
That's right, and we like to hear from you. So if we say something that is incorrect or make incorrect pronunciations, be like Mike Moore and send us an email. Or you could post our problems on the forum. If you go to the website and click on the forum tab, participate on the forum. We'd like to hear from you. You could be telling us what we do wrong or what we do right. And of course, you can always leave us a rating and review through iTunes. We really appreciate that. And Stitcher, for that matter.
Yep.
So the bottom line, we want to hear from you.
Yes.
And until then, I'm Derek.
And I'm Andy. See ya.
This has been a Film Waste presentation, darling.